Good afternoon. I'm Genevieve Haz. I am the Director of PR and Public Affairs for SAGE, and I'm honored to welcome you to this discussion about the importance of advocating for the social sciences and humanities. It's a core tenet for us at SAGE that engaged scholarship is vital to healthy democracies, and we know that without passionate defenders of that cause, wise, just, and evidence-based policy is at serious risk. I want you to know that the public affairs part of my title actually means something at SAGE. We are proud to fund a number of efforts, both in the US and the UK, to advocate for the social and behavioral sciences. SAGE supports lobbying efforts on Capitol Hill in partnership with organizations like the American Educational Research Association, the Consortium of Social Science Associations, and the National Academy of Sciences Division of Behavioral and Social Sciences Education. With these and other partners, SAGE has supported the creation of the Social and Behavioral Sciences Campaign to educate US legislators. In the United Kingdom, SAGE has supported the creation of the Social and Behavioral Sciences Campaign, in the United Kingdom, SAGE has supported the Campaign for Social Science and partners with the British Academy of Social Sciences to educate both the public and policymakers about the real and vital contributions of social science research to society and the economy. So why does SAGE, a publisher, care about good policy? Well, we were born that way. 50 years ago, 24-year-old Sarah Miller McCune founded SAGE, and from day one, Sarah and her husband George were dedicated to helping foster and disseminate usable knowledge in service of a better world. This progressive ideal has been and will remain the guiding light for SAGE. Under the terms of Sarah's estate plan, SAGE cannot be sold after her death and must remain an independent company in perpetuity. Sarah once said, "I suppose people who are drawn to publishing, especially in the social and behavioral sciences, see social change and social justice as important goals to strive for, and they see education as a means to reaching those goals." And I think it's fair to say that everyone at SAGE would agree. In 50 years of publishing, that shared mission has manifested as support for new and emerging disciplines that today are academic mainstays. SAGE pioneered publishing in the fields of evaluation and research methods, and was the first to publish in fields like gender studies and comparative politics and urban studies. And in fact, the first journal that SAGE ever published was Urban Affairs Quarterly, which also turns 50 this year. SAGE has always viewed social science publishing through an interdisciplinary lens, and from that perspective, the interconnectedness of scholarship, knowledge, public policy, and social change has always been clear, and that's why we're here today. So with that, it is my pleasure to introduce your host and moderator, President of the Federation for the Humanities and Social Sciences, Stephen Toope. Stephen's accomplishments are legion. He is the Director of the Monk School of Global Affairs at the University of Toronto, the former President and Vice Chancellor of the University of British Columbia, the former President of the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation, and Dean of Law at McGill. He also served as President of the Canadian Council on International Law and member of the Executive Council of the American Society of International Law. He has published in many leading international journals and co-authored Legitimacy and Legality in International Law, an Interactional Account. Please welcome Stephen Toope.
Thank you very much, Genevieve, for that very kind introduction. And I want to welcome all of you. Bonjour. I'm delighted that you're all here this afternoon for what I know is going to be quite a unique event hosted by the Federation for the Humanities and Social Sciences and by SAGE, and we're very grateful for your participation. We're going to be exploring lessons derived from Canada, the United Kingdom, and the United States in efforts to advocate for the social sciences and humanities. I don't think I have to tell anyone in this room that the social and economic value of a broad-based social science and humanities education is, in our world, constantly being questioned. In the media, in the business community, by government, and sometimes by the public itself. And I think that that is in tension with another reality that in the 21st century, we're facing publics, governments, and businesses that have to grapple with issues that are right at the heart of social science and humanities work. So there's an irony in the current mood. We require people-centered, evidence-based, innovative solutions to really big problems, and yet we're being told that the very disciplines which actually can give us some traction around those issues are not that important. So it's a challenge for all of us, and I think much of what we see in research agendas nationally, not only in Canada, focuses on STEM disciplines, skills. We who care about the social sciences and humanities and do research are really getting some short shrift. And yet we know that it's essential for Canada's knowledge economy and society, and no doubt for the UK's and the US's as well, that we create a labor force that includes people with research-based skill sets who understand not just the science of things, but the science of peoples and peoples, including arts, languages, histories, ideas, and opportunities. So today's event is going to feature very distinguished speakers from Canada, the UK, and the US who will discuss their experiences in advocating for the social sciences and humanities in their national contexts. We have one participant who's going to be making his contribution through a pre-taped video. James Wilsdon, Professor of Science and Democracy at the University of Sussex and chair of the UK Campaign for the Social Sciences, unfortunately was not able to join us at the last moment because he had an opportunity to engage directly with his minister. So he thought he better take that opportunity. He sent his regrets, but we will hear from him shortly. And of course, live right here, we have Felice Levine to my left, who's Executive Director of American Educational Research Association, and Chad Gaffield, who needs no introduction and is currently serving as Professor of History, having served with great distinction as President of the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council. So after hearing from our presenters, we'll open the floor for discussion, of course. So I'd like now to run the video of James Wilsdon. Thank you.
Hello, this is James Wilson. I'm chair of the Campaign for Social Science in the UK. And I just wanted to say firstly how sorry I am that I can't be with you for the discussion this afternoon. I was very much looking forward to swapping notes and comparing the issues that we face as advocates on behalf of the social sciences in the US, in Canada and the UK. But instead, I'm just going to offer a few introductory thoughts, and then there's a short film that I think you'll be seeing linked to some of the work we've been doing here in the UK. The reason I'm not with you actually today is that I'm involved in a project for the government here in London, looking at aspects of the research system here and the way in which we can improve the way we organise funding and research assessment. So I'm engaged to some extent in the issues that we're trying to promote through the campaign. But the Campaign for Social Science was set up in 2011 by the Academy of Social Sciences in the UK with the aim of acting as a stronger voice for the social sciences with policymakers, parliamentarians, officials in government, with the wider public and with the media. And we do our work through a range of events, bringing together leading speakers, leading social scientists to engage with policymakers. We engage in a range of advocacy activities, and particularly at this time in the UK, we've just had a general election. We're now going into a spending review. We do a lot to try and marshal evidence and build coalitions of advocacy within and around the social sciences to try and demonstrate to government and others the contribution that we make to the economy, to society, to democracy, and all the other ways in which the social sciences make a difference. In recent months, the main way we've been doing that here is through a particular report we published back in February, which I'll just wave at you here, The Business of People. This was the product of around a year's work, a group of us pulling together all the arguments we could find to demonstrate the value of the social sciences. There's a lot more information about what we do on the Campaign for Social Science website. We also have an annual report that came out a few months ago. And as I say, you'll see a separate film about the Business of People report in a moment. But just to say about what we do next, the campaign has three big priorities for the next couple of years. The first is to deepen and continue our policy and advocacy work. We'll be doing particular activities around spending and investment on social science. We're also looking to follow up projects that we can do that build on that report. We're currently planning one we've called The Health of People, to look particularly at the contribution that social sciences make to the health system in the UK and the way in which we need to recognise more explicitly the social science dimensions of health. We're also engaged in widening and broadening the coalition of supporters that we have in the social sciences. We're particularly keen to get more business voices speaking up for social science. We notice always that our colleagues in the natural sciences are often able to marshal vocal support from the business community, particularly when budgets are under pressure, and we're keen that the many companies and other private sector players who actually draw very heavily on social scientists and social science skills are more explicit in the support that they express for the contribution we make. And then finally, we're keen to do more in the public arena, just to make wider public audiences more aware of the value of social science, to work with the many skilled and capable colleagues we have across the university system and among the practitioner community of social scientists in the UK to strengthen our voice in government and in the media and in wider public debate. So those are some of our plans. I hope that very brief introduction and the film you're about to see are a useful introduction to the work of the campaign. As I say, sorry again not to be there to exchange thoughts in person, but we think these kind of conversations across different national systems are really important, and the campaign certainly is very keen to learn from and engage with our colleagues in Canada, in the US, and further afield in the months and years ahead. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you very much for that. And now I'm going to ask for our colleague from the United States, Felice Levine, to offer a perspective on the campaign as it exists in the U.S.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I'm going to try to focus on what's been happening in the U.S., but I really think that all of us who've been engaged in this enterprise really see tremendous complementarity, both in the challenges we confront and also the way that we're engaging with them, certainly in Canada and in the UK and in the United States. But really, for those of us whose work has taken on a more international, comparative perspective, there are similar kinds of histories and challenges and opportunities and accomplishments, I think, worldwide. First, I want to just say briefly, because I'll try to be on a fast track of getting some facts on the table, how much I value this forum having been planned by the Federation in collaboration with SAGE, because it's just the kind of conversation we need to stimulate and engage in and have great dinners about and strategize and figure out some new ways of what I'm going to say later is, changing the conversation, although I think the conversation we've been engaged in strategically has been quite important. I especially, for those of you who are skipping out of some cutting-edge science presentation in the social science side or work in the humanities of significant scholarship and importance, it's nice to see some faces. One never knows if there's going to be a turnout in these kinds of fora, and it's really kind of gratifying that you're sufficiently interested and engaged to be here, and I'm assuming that's what brought you here, other than meeting fatigue. Today, I want to briefly frame some of the issues. I'm going to speak a little bit more from the social science side, largely because that's the space, the social and behavioral science side, that I primarily have been operating in. But one of the things that we recognize across and within all fields of scholarship and across all fields of science, and I think particularly in the social sciences, so I applaud the official adjacency within Canada. In the United States, we have a Social Science Research Council that works in very close proximity to the American Council of Learned Societies, but in the early part of the 20th century, there were kind of two complementary paths that work in combination, but not in one organizational framework. So the single organizational framework, I think, is quite quite gratifying to see and reinforcing, I think, of the directions that we've all been moving forward in the 21st century. So I'm trying to see if I can kind of speed dial a little bit. 6 topics, about a minute a topic, at the intersection of social science and advocacy. First, a little bit about history and legitimacy. Second, some early lessons learned, because this isn't so new. I guess the third is the current situation for the social sciences, or as we call them in the United States, the SBS sciences. Briefly returning to lessons learned, but maybe some reinvention of the strategies that we had been the train that we had been moving forward on for at least since about 1980, 1981. And then some ways that we can change the conversation and the implications for changing the conversation. And so I hope I don't get too stuck on 1 through 4, so that I skip too briefly over 5 and 6. In terms of the history and legitimacy, as I said, the issues are not new. There's been a mixed understanding of social science as a science that dates back, and I'm not the historian I wish I were, as someone who's engaged in sociology of knowledge, particularly on the social science side, but at least within the United States, where our modern university is not quite as historic as some of those from the other side of the Atlantic. The emergence of the social and behavioral sciences was really a kind of a phenomena of the late 19th century. The specification of social science disciplines, the late 19th century and the early 20th century, and what we would call at least the modern university, although there were certainly U.S. universities that date back to our early history, as in the case of Canada. There's been a lack of public understanding of SBS science as sciences, and a lower status among public leaders, lay public, and policy elites. In the U.S., the system for the federal government, the national government's support of all science, is distributed, where the more mission-oriented funding of science happens within our mission agencies, like the Department of Justice has a National Institute of Justice. The U.S. Department of Education has the Institute of Education Sciences, but the premier, or the agency created for the dedicated purpose, and I say this as someone who did spend almost 12 years there, so I'm a bit partisan, but it's the premier agency, the National Science Foundation, with the primary mission to advance the health of science. And thus what happens isn't that it's the largest one in dollars, but it's often a bellwether of problems and issues and challenges of what may be happening elsewhere. The National Science Foundation was created in 1950 with the intent of being not a political football. It was very much a shared commitment post-World War II of there being a necessity to invest in the fundamentals of building the knowledge base across science. But in 1950, when it was established, the place of the social sciences was somewhat, I won't say precarious, but I guess it was considered an option. In 1988, the then NSF historian George Mazuzan wrote, "Debates over including the social sciences in the programs of the foundation have punctuated the legislative history of the statute. Those disciplines finally were permitted but not required, and they were labeled under other science." In 1958, there was the first establishment of an Office of Social Science, and so some of this texture that we know, even when we say the word STEM, how frequently do we envision the essence STEM to really include the social sciences? And if I have one goal in my next, in whatever shelf life remains, it is so that policymakers and even those of us in our sciences and the public understand that the S is indeed inclusive of the notion that we say science is one and science is best done in an integrated way. In these early years, a lot of the same kinds of issues that we're seeing now, one saw in the 70s. In particular, the 1950s and 60s were a period somewhat of science growth in the United States as well, therefore, in the social sciences. But there were, just as we're seeing now, ridiculing of grants by silly titles. There was a senator in the U.S. Congress, Proxmire, who was a Democrat from Wisconsin, who gave the Golden Fleece Award across for frivolous spending and work that was of little value, and at least the initial ones were in the social sciences, and they remained disproportionately in the sciences. In 1981, there was a kind of a watershed. The economy was in rugged shape. We had a new president, President Ronald Reagan, and a new head of the Office of Management and Budget that had a very strong control over resources and requests that were advanced by the administration to Congress. And David Stockman, a former congressman, had a very slash and burn perspective, as we thought at the time, to the social sciences, which would have reduced the social sciences by some 80% at NSF had that happened, and annihilated some programs, including at the time the one that I was directing. The attacks took a variety of forms, but they tended to have the kind of stereotypic thinking that we see now. The social sciences as inferior sciences, basic research in our sciences are not particularly useful at points of limited resource. They are at least a lower priority. And then the often caricature that the work that we do in the social sciences states the obvious, or some view it as a reaffirmation of political preferences or positions. Although that is often said these days about the environmental sciences. It's the pro-environment persons who think from a policy perspective or public perspective that we should enjoy clean air and reduce earth warming, and thus the science is sort of led by the policy as opposed to the policy driven by the science. In this period, several organizations were established, most in particular the Consortium of Social Science Associations, from what was basically an informal group of social and behavioral science associations that had executive directors that would meet informally once a month or once every 2 months, and there was a formalization of the Consortium of Social Science Associations, very much enabled by the Social Science Research Council at the time, and that played a very instrumental role in the establishment of working with the executive directors to establish COSA. Also at the time, something that is now called the Federation of Associations in Behavioral and Brain Sciences was established, and in particular the Council on Federal Associations on Federal Statistics. The reason why I want to mention the statistics and the data side is that I think, as in the UK and also as in Canada, we often see these as somewhat separate and apart, but I think growingly we recognize during this period that we really need to be thinking about data and statistics, the fundamentals of the research, and also capacity building and education. So let me kind of move forward to our current situation. For approximately 3 years, there's been kind of a resurgence of this, of what appears to be a kind of a somewhat of an antisocial science attacks, particularly in Congress. They are what does appear to be somewhat different, but it's part of a continuing conversation. It's more partisan and has kind of reshaped and transformed what were bipartisan statespersons on both sides of the aisle to being a more partisan issue. It's definitely less fringe, so it's not, oh, well, it could be dismissed rather centrally because there's very firm collective support. It seems to be part of a general kind of anti-science critique, and it's taken the form of both attacks on areas like health economics at NIH several years ago, political science and the possible defunding of political science, from currently more from those who identify as Republicans than Democrats, which is only part of the larger conversation, less about science than the lack of shared agreement around so many issues that we're facing. So advocacy is important for a variety of reasons, and hopefully those will be topics that we can return to in the Q&A. But in terms of our current situation, I think there are a number of things that we both are doing differently and are hoping will produce the kind of sea change that will sort of change the conversation as opposed to recursively dealing every 4 years or 5 years or 8 years with similar kinds of issues. One is to expand the groups that we're working with. There's much more attention to working with higher education groups and the higher ed community. We are working to try to engage other sectors, the business community, the foundation world, the military establishment, those who are often very strong users and adapters of the long-term knowledge that we produce and appreciate the federal role in funding. We've developed, I think, media strategies and messaging that are more effective, although we certainly have a long way to go, and the social and behavioral science community has developed a way of stronger collaboration together in something that we now also call, both sharing and borrowing from our UK colleagues, the SBS Science Campaign. That does not grow out of our national academies, but our academy itself has established a round table. So the SBS Science Campaign is something a creature of the social and behavioral science societies with other affiliated groups and the strong involvement of the national academies. But in the United States, the National Academies is a quasi-governmental institution and established by the government, and their capacity to do certain forms of advocacy is quite different than in, I think, in other countries and cultures. But the roundtable established by the National Academies is aiming to enhance communication, create a cross-sector roundtable across different institutional players to think through how we both change the conversation and work collaboratively in a way that enhances both policymaker understanding of the value of our science and public. So if I can just end with two messages, one directed to all of us, and that is, as fields of science, I think we have been somewhat gun-shy. Indeed, there's a recent survey across from the University of Michigan studying their academics across all fields. And there's a kind of an apprehension about what I consider to be education or advocacy or providing a better and richer understanding of our fields. And we need to bridge the divide, and something that I was very impressed that Sarah notes in some of her own speaking, that we need to bridge the divide and the distinction between what is being knowledge producers and not seeing public engagement as political engagement around the substance. It's political engagement around the values of why we are seeking to produce the kinds of knowledge that we're seeking to produce. And the other, which may seem to be long-term, and even among our colleagues, it's, oh, that looks like it's far away. but we really need what we know in our sciences as early development matters. Early socialization matters. Re-education is tough. And when we look at all of the stakeholders and leaders, including in our own communities, who may not understand that there's a one science for all and we all are part of a shared set of phenomena, if we can integrate the study of social and behavioral, institutional and organizational phenomena as a subject of scientific inquiry and discovery early in our educational process, we will not need to explain in the decades ahead why it is that social science is a science.
Thank you very, very much. Professor Gaffield.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to go very, very quickly. It is great to be here, and I just want to say how terrific it is to be next to you. As you know, Stephen Toope worked shoulder to shoulder during my years at SSHRC, and I just want to say how thrilled I am that I have a chance to be shoulder to shoulder with you here today. I also want to say how fitting it is in terms of the organization of this, our colleagues at the Federation, Gary, that we have an international perspective with colleagues in the UK and the US, and we've certainly worked very, very hard, and it's great to keep that conversation going. I'm going to, I think our take is slightly different, and for the presentation, I'm going to really emphasize differences here, just for the sake of that. And I'm going to start with the claim that the era we're in has the potential to be a golden age for the social sciences and humanities. I think as well things could go horribly wrong, but I want to emphasize that. Secondly, often the way we think of what's going on now in terms of what's wrong, the problem that we diagnose in the social science humanities, we talk about it in terms of, you know, people don't get us. We are not understood. And then we say, well, the solution to that is we have to educate them. Let me sit you down and tell you. And if you really got it, you would appreciate and you would think about these things differently. Stephen alluded to a little bit in those kind of things in terms of some kind of a irony, or I would think about it as you know, it's a real challenge. So I want to start with a quick anecdote. In the 1990s, I was part of a group that was gotten together by AUCC, was and others, Federation and so on, other groups, and our mission was to spend a whole day, and there were many of us from all across Canada, and we were armed with little packets. We were going to go on Parliament Hill, we were going to meet with MPs, and it had all been lined up, and we were going to tell them all the wonderful things that was happening on university campuses. And so we had brochures, and it was worked on for a long time. We went up there, and we had these meetings, one after the other, and they were most unsatisfying. The poor MP would sit there. They were running in for many things, and they were tolerant. They were nice, and they'd sometimes try to, yes, fine, in my next meeting, goodbye. In one I walked into, and the MP was a little late, and he was rushing in, and all of a sudden, something just came to me. And I said to them, I said, sir, what are you coming from? And he says, there was a standing committee meeting, and there's a really issue. And I said, well, what was it? And he says, well, we're debating this young offenders, and he said, you know, some people want us to just lock them all in jail and put them away. Others say, you know, put them in jail, it's going to get worse, and we don't know what to do. And then he turned to me, he said, and I said, well, wait a minute. And happily, I knew something about that. And all of a sudden, I started saying, you know, there's some researchers, and they're looking at this and that. Can I bring them in and talk to you and make some connection? I had his attention in ways that transcended, and it just sticks in my mind all the time. I'm going to move ahead to the next point. So what's happening now, and this is what's different, I think, is that in the last 10, 20 years, 30 years maybe, there is unprecedented interest in terms of human thought and behavior. This has come on campus, and I think we sort of forget this. The rise of medical humanities. We forget McMaster, some decades ago now, all of a sudden redoes their whole curriculum for training physicians in terms of thinking it through and incorporating into that the humanities. Now, those of us in the social science humanities are sort of like, whoa. And I think we saw that as over there, and I don't think we really understood it too much. Why are they doing that? But that was the start of a systematic increase in the sense of other parts of campus wanting to know what's going on over there. And what's so interesting about it, that their interest in us was often not what we thought we were doing. When we thought, what are you doing over there, and what are your students doing, and so on, and we get onto, they're learning to think critically, and they're very creative, and they're learning to communicate, and so on. No, it was the fact that we were studying human beings. We were studying human thought and behavior, and that was of such interest. And in recent years, that's gone beyond the campus in terms of two big factors. One is every sector, private sector, nonprofit sector, public sector, they all talk about talent. If their operations are going to be successful, they want to hire talented people. And when they think about that, they're not thinking just about technical skills, and maybe even in part. They're thinking about, does this person understand the society we're in? Do they understand human thought and behavior? Do they understand the complexity of human beings? And so increasingly what we see is companies saying, if we're going to be successful, it's not by getting a new widget. That's only part of the problem. It's our ability to understand consumers. It's our ability to understand markets. It's all our ability to understand and find a role in society. And you can say that across the scope. So all of a sudden, our fields now, whether it's other parts of campus, and the International Association of Natural Sciences a couple of years ago, their single resolution at their biannual meeting was to increase connections with our disciplines. And so my sense, the next point I want to make is, I'm not sure we're just now learning how to deal with this and ready for this. And so much of our practices, our policies, and the way we think have not really been prepared for this. I just went to a conference on the future of humanities doctorate at McGill. And it was a great event, bringing across many, many people. But two people there, two of our speakers, people I really respect, got up and said, well, one thing we can all agree on, that the role of the humanities doctoral programs is to train students in the disciplines and educate them in terms of their becoming autonomous scholars. And they sort of park that as a given. We all agree on that, and now we're moving forward. And I'm thinking about that, and I'm thinking about how does that respond to the thirst for scholars in our field who are able to engage across campus meaningfully, who are not tied up on dichotomies of words and numbers, who are not caught up on a lot of those 19th, 20th century sorts of separations that haven't been helpful, that can engage across campus and can engage with the larger society and try to help the thirst. And I think my sense, at least, is that we have a world of work to do. And Stephen said that at the start, Felice, you mentioned this word, engagement. This really changes things in terms of new notions of co-creation, the decentering of the expert, the end of the broadcast, the whole importance of starting with listening and engaging. It's such a different approach. I think it's such an exciting time. My sense is that this is a time in the 21st century when we can really contribute in unbelievable ways in terms of our understandings of human thought and behavior in the past, and how that might, in intended, unintended ways, help make a good 21st century. But we must, I think, embrace this new era. We must realize that so many of our policies, practices, and so on are not designed for this. They're designed for a very different way of thinking about us. All those debates about, are we relevant? No, we're irrelevant. All those things, I think, are really been bypassed. So I guess my closing word is just to say, I think the Congress is a great example of storytellers. All those initiatives are that take an engagement approach that don't start with us and blame others, but rather get rid of those dichotomies and really, I think, embrace the fact that I would say for the first time in the history of the world, we are really taking seriously the challenge of understanding human thought and behavior, and it turns out that this is our mandate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chad. As always, I think very challenging commentary. We now have the opportunity to have questions and conversation. Please use the microphones that are set up in either aisle if you have a question. Nous ne proposons pas de service d'interprétation simultanée pour cet événement. Toutefois, je vous invite à poser vos questions ou en français ou en anglais et nous ferons notre possible pour traduire si besoin. Thanks very much, everyone. Yes, please identify yourself and go ahead.
My name is Jason Vermiller. I'm from Thompson Rivers University. I teach in the Journalism and Communications New Media Department, primarily communications courses. I'm also the chair of the Arts Faculty Council, so we get very vigorous commentary about these type of matters. And one of the things that keeps coming up is we have many courses in the arts, especially in the English and communications areas, that are service courses. And they're called service courses because they serve the needs of other lines of investigation. Students are often reticent to actually take the course. We get used to it. There's also a compounding aspect of that as far as the other parts of what the social science and the humanities envelop, and that is the arts themselves. And the arts aren't very clearly defined, much like the social sciences weren't at one time. And we've had discussions about getting an education policy out there and trying to teach, as you said. So I had to laugh at what you were saying there, sir. And part of my background is also in marketing before I became a professor at a university. And I really did appreciate how you said that you met the guy where he lived. I'm wondering, I guess as just a commentary from anyone, and that is, how do we do a better job of meeting the public? Because it's all fine and well to, I mean, we are in Ottawa, right? But the public at large doesn't seem to have a valued sense about what the arts and humanities and social sciences are. There's a confusion. And even as I'm saying that, I'm also thinking that one of the projects I took on with my chair present here was to actually put together some sort of campaign on campus to explain to the students what we teach. And they're not even clear, because I don't even think that some of the academic planners are clear about what we do specifically or what it is that we're doing, except fulfilling accreditations and making sure our courses articulate in some way. But I just wanted some commentary about maybe how do we clarify, because you started in that direction, sir, but I wanted to hear more about how to clarify and where do we clarify so that the public at large starts standing up and saying, yeah, Neil deGrasse Tyson, cool. But then we also have these other people to consider as well who are also equally and maybe even more cool. So,
thank you. Chad, do you want to start?
Sure, I'll have a cut at this. And my answer basically is the one you're going to expect, and that is to start with where they are. But I'll tell you how I did it as president of SSHRC. People would say, I'd meet them somewhere, and they'd say, well, what do you do? And I initially was like, well, I'm the president of a research council of Canada. What we do is blah, 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 blah. And, like, that would work. But then I started saying to people, you know how businesses and government societies, it comes down to really a question of people? And they'd say, yeah. I said, well, we fund research about people because we really feel that that's one of the keys. And they go, oh. So and then I'd quickly ask them and I try to make a connection to them. And I think my sense, at least, is that, recently we're all, bent out of shape. Margaret Wente, writes another article and cherry picks titles, right? And we lived with this like crazy, right? But what I learned to do, and Ursula Goebel and others will laugh at this, Tim Russworm, what I learned to do and what I did, one of the things, I think the most useful thing I did as president was, when I was at SSHRC, to keep track of the kinds of speeches and topics that various MPs were making. James Verjot makes a speech on the importance of financial literacy and blah, blah, blah. He's going to get from me a personal note saying, there's a group of our researchers that think that's a really important topic as well. Would you like to chat with them more about that? And there was no topic that someone could speak about that we couldn't go into our database and find out. And that would get the conversation going. And inevitably, that could then lead to other things. But I found it impossible to start with my side and try to tell them I needed a hook. And I think that's what the storytellers do. You look at those 3 minutes, they have a hook. And I think we've got to get there.
Felice.
Actually, I share the view. I actually thought we were in heated agreement. So in the following way, when I was actually emphasizing education at the end or changing the conversation, it is when in any kind of social movement or interest group, when you're trying to explain yourself, you're at your worst. What you're much better doing is listening and trying to see how you can, quote unquote, change the conversation. And so, and that in this period of new technology, new ways of communicating, we do not need to be as reliant as we are on what would be considered to be the stakeholder elites. There's ways of crowdsourcing and communicating with different publics in a very direct way. The emphasis that I placed on earlier education as opposed to later education is to have those very conversations as part of the process. It wasn't a strategy of getting the message across better, but was to have those conversations as an integral part of having persons realize as they develop and as they are educated that knowledge matters. Knowledge is power. When you're dealing with those of public influence, you should be demanding, where's the evidence? Whatever the field that's in, and that if we can help to stimulate that in our fields, we will serendipitously, I think, help where we are situated in the longer haul and the shorter haul. And I think the field of communications has really a lot to offer us all in that regard.
Thank you. Yes, go ahead.
First, I just wanted to thank you for the talk. I really connected with it. As a PhD student, this is something that I am contending with. I have been in the process of applying for funding, and my research does cross quite a few different disciplines. I use measures of EEG, I look at bullying and victimization, and I also look at mental health. So that kind of crosses 3 different agencies, and as a student it can be hard to figure out where to put myself. So I'm just wondering, as a student, how can I advocate for the social sciences, and where do I fit in that umbrella that has been kind of segregated? So yeah, I just guess that's my question for you.
Great question. Felice, would you like to start on this one?
I think it's very important for graduate students to, in terms of your intellectual arenas of interest, really be driven by what's your passion. I think the passions will fit into some form of funding, if not the institutions in which you're in, for some seed money support from some private foundations. Present, share your work, have others critique your work ruthlessly if you can. And I think there are many opportunities to for those early in their career to develop, and we have a responsibility later in our career to create that space so that the only standard of effective performance is not just the article. And I think scientific societies and groups like the Federation have a particular role to play, so that we want to be able to communicate, for example, if one is writing an op-ed piece for a newspaper, the difference between a well-reasoned, well-warranted op-ed piece and we can train that and need to train that and develop that in our students. What oral communication is like. I would imagine if I had the training I wished I had, I would have stuck much better to those 10 minutes than I did. And it's very important that we think that through in an effective way, whether it's oral communication, written communication, whether it's policy pieces. The graduate students I recognize in that status hierarchy, have a limited amount of influence in changing the way things are evaluated. But I think with the voice and collaboration with scientists who do care, you should be part of the conversation and not defer the conversation.
Chad.
Well, very quickly, you're raising I think, a key question in the sense of our need to overcome the 19th, 20th century, especially, dichotomy of disciplinary interdisciplinary. And when, we divided the ways of knowing vertically, and I think the underlying metaphor was a jigsaw puzzle. Those chemists are going to study the chemist piece, the biologists over there, history's going to, and then we'll add it all up and we'll have the whole puzzle. And we know now that that's a crazy metaphor. Why? What happens is one new piece gets put in and the whole puzzle changes. And so the metaphor that I think we're all trying to work on, and the expression that I like, is discipline-based interdisciplinarity. So an awareness, and sometimes I like to think about this as T-shaped, an awareness of the horizontal oneness, the kind of question, but the fact that to really address that and get there, there's some perspectives that can feed and connect into that. But obviously, so many of our structures have just got the vertical side, they don't have the horizontal side. And I find on campuses now, being back, I must say, it's a real issue in terms of budgeting. You face that as president of UBC and every university. How do you do that? And I think at the research councils, for example, what we were trying to do in terms of going from separate councils that basically never talked to each other and stayed away, and you're like there or there, it's us and them. We really developed that horizontal piece. We have ways to go, and I know the team is continuing to work on that, but much more thinking in terms of the Tri-Council, of what we call TCQ+, of ways of embracing the fact that so many interesting questions need various perspectives, but they can't be additive. They're not additive. It must be an engagement approach, and that would even be on the campus. So you're absolutely right. We have a world to go. Many times the kind of research you're doing is ahead of the 19th and 20th century structures. I think the policies, practices, I think they're starting to evolve. I just wish it could be faster.
We have time for one last question, and I'm going to have to ask all of you to be very brief because we do have to conclude at 3 o'clock promptly. Ursula.
To be under 3 minutes. So, and actually the responses to the last question address this to some extent. Often our structures for advocacy clearly delineate roles as to who's doing the advocacy and who's doing the research and who's doing the training. That is our structure. The Federation plays a huge role. We as a funding agency, we can't be advocates for government because we are government, but we advocate for social science and humanities. And so the roles of advocacy are placed in different structures. So my question, and perhaps maybe a call for comment, is related to, given the significant, I feel, work that's been done by a number of the players in advocacy, we are in an urgent state now for the participation to respond. And the challenge we see is the community sometimes does not even see themselves in the discussion. If we're looking at the complexities of issues around natural resources and energy, we have high-tech companies asking for the humanities to participate, and the humanities community is going, really? Like, you want to hear from us? So the urgency to be prepared, regardless of who is in the role of advocacy and advocating. So perhaps to respond, are we ready, and how quickly can we mobilize the community, regardless of who's doing it?
And I'm afraid you each have 1 minute to respond. Go ahead, Felice.
I'll cede by you too.
Yeah, no, you can have one. I think we are ready. I think there's much more synergism and interaction across these different quote unquote estates, whether it's the funding estate, the individual researcher, the research societies, the federations. I think, and the other institutions and agencies. So there's much more discussion about how we create the space to have those conversations and have and to be able to identify ways in which we can bring and mobilize our strongest researchers across age and stage and fields to really be able to engage in that. So when I'm on the Hill, or Capitol Hill in D.C., in Congress, when we're meeting with staff, we actually say, well, what's on your menu? And they sort of have this view, oh, it's going to take forever. And we say, no, we can put together a seminar and put you in touch with some of the key researchers and develop an expert resource list, or show you how you can use various search engines to get to the information you want. So I'm kind of optimistic about it. We need to develop models for it. but I don't think the level of inhibition is as high as it has been.
Thank you.
My 15 seconds. I think we need to learn more about why the rest of the campus is interested in us and how we can build on that, and why the rest of society is interested in us. Not necessarily in the way we want to broadcast, but in fact in our knowledge and understanding and ability to contribute in terms of human thought and behavior.
Thank you very much. I want to thank SAGE and the Federation for bringing together this, I think, really important panel to our Congress. And, of course, I want to extend gratitude to our hosts at the University of Ottawa. I'm struck, and I'll end with just one observation, that if I picked up anything from the conversation, it is that we have to stop being on projection mode, and we have to move into listening mode and responsive mode. And intriguingly for me, that ties together not only advocacy, but what we now know about learning. So if we think about how it is that teaching and learning is changing, and I think it is fundamentally, then I think we can also learn from that in terms of how advocacy strategies have to change, so that we are not, the sage, on the stage, but the people who are responding to the felt needs of our own society, of which we are a part, not separate. In any event, I'll close with those comments. Merci beaucoup. C'était une conversation très intéressante, and I wish you all a very good day. Thank you very much.